Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. It's a big week for the podcast as we usher in a new season for a spring and summer sport, and also a programming note that you won't want to miss out on, as the latest podcast is about to be served as this. It's a JAYREELZ podcast with Joe's JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we have the first 4 days of the tournament in the books, and with the recap about to be brought upon here, and all I got to say is, not to try to throw cold water, not to try to be the Debbie Downer, or in this case, I guess the David Downer, who knows. But you have to admit that the madness that we were all hoping for, the madness that we were anticipating, fizzled out big time. Now, yesterday did salvage what was pretty much a dreadful first 3 days. And I understand you had a few upsets, a bunch of 5-12s, two in particular. And then you had the big game on Saturday with Arkansas and St. John's and how that unfolded. But when we take a big picture look at what had happened, and we talked about this a little bit on Thursday, knowing that this is going to be a top-heavy tournament where you have a lot of ones and twos that you think that would have survived to get to a point where they would end up being the final 16. As we know, 7 of the ones and twos made it. Obviously, St. John's did not. And you had another 3 seed out in Iowa State. But besides that, it's pretty much been a chalk tournament. Now, you've had a couple of surprises there where Memphis loses to Colorado State. And obviously, they were a big part of what happened yesterday as far as a buzzer beater, as far as some thrills and some drama that we have not seen throughout the first 4 days. And even though with McNeese State putting on a big performance over Clemson, and Drake with a big win against Missouri where the coach said we expected to do so. And yes, it was nice to see those upsets there in the first couple of days of the tournament. But overall, it has pretty much been a yawner, ho-hum, nothing really to write home about until you got to Saturday. And Saturday, where the afternoon tilt between St. John's and Arkansas, and that was a surprise. I don't think anybody saw that coming. And we could talk about the head coaching matchup with John Calipari and Rick Pitino. Not a lot of love lost there between the two, although very respectable, as was discussed by Pitino there prior to the game against the Razorbacks. But what we saw there was St. John's, and we talked about this a little bit here leading up into the tournament, how despite the fact that they were deserving to be a 2 seed, and with everything that had transpired in the regular season, winning the regular season in the Big East, winning the Big East tournament, winning their first game against Omaha, all right, nothing really to sneeze at there, but for them to not only just fall short here, but fall way short. And we know that their offense could be from hunger at times. And we saw that there in full display Saturday afternoon, to where RJ Lewis, their big-time player, did not show up, was 3 for 19, sat on the bench for the final few minutes of the game. And Rick Pitino, what did you expect him to do? Throw his player under the bus? He took him out of the game. He was ice cold, 9 points, the lowest offensive output he had all year. And boy, what a time to come up with that type of performance. But for Pitino in the postgame, a lot of people were wondering, why did you sit him out? And pretty much with your own eyes, you saw why. He was unable to throw the ball into the ocean off of a boat, had just a pathetic performance. And then you had Kadari Richmond, who fouled out of the game, was in foul trouble the whole game, only played 16 minutes. And for St. John's, when you have your 2 big guns that are supposed to carry you through at least to a Sweet 16, fall way short, I mean, what do you expect? Now, give credit to Arkansas. You got to give credit to what John Calipari had done. They were pretty much played from in front the whole game. And even though St. John's came all the way back to cut it to within 2, and I believe, what was it, about 6 and change to go. And then their offense just went to sleep, pretty much put themselves in an early spring vacation to where they couldn't make any 3-pointers down the stretch. And when you're shooting, think about this, 10% from 3 and 28% from the field in the game, how do you expect for them to advance? Now, Arkansas, listen, give them credit. I understand I'm getting on St. John's here, not because of the Georgetown St. John's the rivalry dating back 40 years when you think about it. And, of course, I do not like St. John's in the least, but what you saw there and what I witnessed was one that you just have to shake your head and throw your hands up to say that they were unable to get any type of clutch baskets down the stretch, despite the fact that they cut it to 2, and maybe just absolutely thought that they could have put on a run to where they would have closed out the game and would have escaped there with a victory similar to BYU there, which we'll get to in a minute. But for the Red Storm, that is as bitter of a loss as you're actually going to find. And I understand that your offense did not show up, and you could get on Patino if you want for taking out Lewis, who we all know that he's a guy that is going to be a go-to even in a situation where he shot terribly in the game. But he looked at it and saw, you know what, I got to put this guy on ice. And even though the press there at the end of the game were trying to figure out why did he take him out, why didn't you leave him in there, so on and so forth, and all he said is, well, you witnessed it, right? And reading between the lines, that's what it was. He wasn't going to sell his player up the river there. So you have to understand, Patino, I understand frustrated, and you have to look at him as one that this is going to stick with him, considering the wild carpet ride that they had from pretty much the middle of November up until Saturday afternoon. And now it just all came crashing down, unfortunately, for the Red Storm as they do not advance. And Calipari, what could you say? First year in Arkansas and done a tremendous job there to get his team to that point. And now in a Sweet 16 where his Kentucky team, or former Kentucky team, is there as well. So he has some interesting storylines, which I'll touch on more on Thursday's podcast. But for right now, Saturday, that was the big one there, with St. John's falling way short of their goal of getting to a Sweet 16 and even a regional final, which would have been interesting against Florida. But obviously that's not going to come to pass. Now, with BYU, let's talk about them real quick. And with the Cougars, I talked about this team being dangerous. I talked about this team, one that could actually get to a Final Four because they have some big-time scoring. And you saw that there were Richie Saunders. And considering that they led big time there against Wisconsin, and then it came down to that final stretch there where the Badgers were unable to get the equalizer. Now, give it up. They had to come from a big deficit, and they had some big play there by John Chanje, who had 37 points, the most so far we've seen here in the tournament. But give it up, as much as BYU looked like they were floundering there, and Wisconsin with that furious comeback where Tanji had that shot there from the baseline, which was defended well. And when they got the ball and raced to the other end of the court where the horn went off, and even though the dunk didn't count, maybe you can look at that as a little bit of some showboating there. And I get it was exuberance. They're college kids. You can't get crazy there. If it was a pro, you could understand a little bit different. But for BYU to get out of that game, and there's always going to be one of these games when you're trying to get to a Final Four or winning a tournament, similar to what we saw there with Florida, which I'll get to in a second. But for the Cougars, they were able to survive as a 6th seed to advance. And when they knocked off Wisconsin, who a lot of people thought maybe they would have some length here in this tournament, but give it up for what the Cougars have done here. And let's see what they could do as they get to a Sweet 16 and march on. Now, as far as yesterday, this is where things shifted a little bit. And you have to give it up for the mettle and toughness for Florida, because just when we thought that UConn was going to be able to put themselves in a position where as champions back-to-back, and even though a lot of the players of the past have left, whether it's Donovan Clingan or Stephen Castle or guys like that, where here they are at this juncture knowing that Florida, a lot of people think that they're going to win the whole thing, and I picked them to win the whole enchilada. But for Walter Clayton Jr., who UConn did a very good job there in the first half, but for him to score 13 of his 23 points in the final 7-8 minutes of the game, and for the Gators, who a lot of people thought on the ropes, we've seen this movie before with UConn being able to pull these games out and to have that DNA, knowing what it takes to win in those tough games and those tough matchups. But for them to get those points when they absolutely needed from Walter Clayton, including 2 big threes down the stretch, and they had a situation where they were tied there late in the game, and with 3 minutes to go, that's when Clayton turned it on, and they were able to prevail there and beat the Huskies and slay the 2-time defending Dragon. and give it up for what Florida, just like BYU, if you're going to win the whole thing or at least get to a Final Four, you're going to have to win games like that. And those are games that you're going to put in your back pocket and remember as they advance to know what it took to win that type of game. And even though UConn is not the same team that had won those back-to-back titles, but with the head coach, as we know, Dan Hurley, and with a couple of players on the roster that knows what it takes to win, and for the Gators, they were able to withstand that. And Clayton rose to the occasion when he absolutely had to, which was a big thing for him because a lot of people thought as a first-team All-American, he's going to have to show the country and obviously the college basketball world what he is made of, and he certainly did so in a big stage against a big opponent and certainly came through smelling like roses. So you have to give it up for Clayton. You have to give it up for the Gators, similar to what BYU did, but the Gators have a lot more as a 1 seed on their plate than BYU, a team that, yes, could make a nice run, but maybe not expected to get to a Final Four, where the Gators are expected to win the whole thing. And for Clayton to, for whatever reason, he had to channel whatever was inside of him to make sure that he stayed cool, calm, and collected, like I mentioned with those couple of big threes during that stretch where he scored those 13 points. And for the Gators to advance, just a big game, which was the facilitator for what lied ahead yesterday, because as I mentioned, the first 3 days of the tournament, somewhat blah. And although there were good games that we could discuss, but really we want to get to the games that had meaning, the games that certainly are going to raise the eyebrows of the college basketball fan, of the ones who are watching, who had their brackets maybe blown up if they had St. John's going to a final, or let's say just to a Final Four. Or maybe their alma mater didn't advance and they were hoping to do so along the way. But the game of the weekend by far was the Colorado State and Maryland game. And that was one, even though Colorado State had the lead at the half, but that was back and forth. That was drama. That was high stakes. Colorado looking to become a double-digit seed to advance, similar to Arkansas, who is a 10 seed. And for Colorado State, the Rams, who looked like they were going to be this close to winning, and they had a lot of lead changes in that second half, and it came down to the final couple of seconds when it boils down, where at 70-68, Colorado State gets that 3 with about 5-6 seconds left, and then smart for the Maryland to call a timeout there, because if they were going to run a play there as time was about to expire, who knows what would have happened there. Now, granted, they probably could have gotten a basket there and would have been able to win the game outright. But for the Terrapins, who after the timeout had the play there for Derek Queen, catches the ball and goes to the left baseline. Now listen, we could argue and talk about this all we want, and similar to what we've seen in the NBA and the same in the college, these officials never call traveling. And let's face it, Derek Queen took about a 5K run to that baseline to bank it off the glass and goes through, and listen, that's no fault on him. The officials should have called it, and we could argue whether or not that the officials should have blown the whistle there. We talk about it all the time in all these sports, whether it be basketball, football, sometimes you have to swallow the whistle, but to me, that was egregious. That was easily 3 steps, and I get it that the officials are going to let that slide for whatever the reason, but as we all know, if you're going to take more than 2 steps, it's a travel. So people could argue whether or not that if the official would have blew the whistle there and called a travel, that people could have been up in arms and say, oh, wait a minute, how are you going to make that call there? It wasn't obvious, this and that. Watch that play not only 5 or 6 times, all you got to do is watch it once. And if you want to rewind it and watch it again, you're going to see that he took 3 steps. I'm sorry. And listen, I'm not knocking the kid and not knocking his shot. I mean, it was a clutch shot. They advanced to a Sweet 16. But the officials, come on, that was a terrible call. Imagine if that was in a regional final, or even, dare I say, a semifinal or national championship game. People would have been just out of their gourd with complaints, wondering why that was not called. And I get it, when the stakes are that high in any sport, in any game, in particular basketball and football, because we've seen the holding calls or the phantom pass interferences, things of that nature. And here in the NBA, you may get the phantom call, or in this case, the phantom travel, if you want to call it that. But if this was in a championship setting, or to get to go to a Final Four, and if that was not called, the university, and who knows, you would have had, just like we saw there with West Virginia last week, about how they got robbed to get to the actual tournament, where the governor came out, and we know what he said in reference to them getting robbed by North Carolina going in. And how did North Carolina do, where they got ousted big time? And Ole Miss, look what they've done. They've gotten themselves here to a Final Four. So give them credit. Even though Carolina, everybody was crazy about how they were in the tournament, considering where they stood, 1-12 against the ranked teams and against teams that were on their schedule. But I digress here. But going back to Maryland and the Colorado State game, if that call was not made in just a big-time crux of a scenario where teams were advancing to a Final Four and beyond, that would have been just criminal. But they get away with it. And it's to no fault of Dairy Queen, to no fault of the Maryland Terrapins. You just wipe your brow and move on and live to see another day. And if you're Colorado State, I know that you're just stewing, and to no fault of your own, but you do have to turn to the official and say, I didn't watch the press game to find out whether the Colorado State coach was killing the refs. I didn't see anything as far as some headlines, because you know that probably would have been the first thing and one of the top headlines that would have been on the ticker or wherever you would have gotten your sports news. But I didn't see anything to where they blasted the officials or even the player for that matter who guarded him. And that was a good defensive play there, as no foul was called, as you saw. But boy, that was just a tough loss there for Colorado State. And for Maryland, one more time, you move on to a Sweet 16 and you just thank your lucky stars that you get to that point. And then you had Ole Miss. Now, that's a mild upset from the standpoint of, I get it, Ole Miss is 6, and you had Iowa State that was ranked number 3, but Ole Miss has really shown, after beating North Carolina and then what you saw there against Iowa State yesterday, a team that looks like they're going to be a tough out. Now, despite that they have to play Michigan State here when we get to the Sweet 16, but for sure you had performances there by the SEC. When you think about it, they had 14 teams enter into the tournament, and half of them were gone. But you have 7 remaining out of the final 16. So if anybody is thinking and maybe even hoping for a Final Four with all SEC teams, that is still alive, because you have Ole Miss, of course, there in the South. In the West, you have Arkansas that could possibly get through, as well as Florida, which a lot of people expect that could be the case. You have Kentucky and Tennessee, which will cancel each other out there, as they'll match up there on the 28th, there on Friday. And then in the East, obviously, you have a scenario where Alabama could get far. So who knows? When it's all said and done, could you actually have Alabama, Auburn, Florida, and either Kentucky or Tennessee make it to a Final Four? Now, that would be fascinating, because the last time we got even 3 teams, as you know, as I talked about several times, is the 85 Final Four with Georgetown, Villanova, and St. John's. But I would think these stakes, maybe not as high as we would think, considering you do have 7 teams, and even though they're spread out throughout the brackets, but that is just an incredible amount of number when you think about almost half of the teams that are left standing for a chance to get to a Final Four are from one conference, that being the SEC. And that is pretty much a recap of the weekend. If I had to rate it overall, I'd say a C, because you did have some competitive games. Now, you didn't have a lot of buzzer beaters. You didn't have, notwithstanding Maryland and Colorado State, of course. And even though you had some thrilling endings with the BYU scenario, which we saw there on Saturday, and then you had also another game at UConn and Florida. It didn't really come down to the wire, but that was certainly tooth and nail. But you didn't have a lot of these matchups where you are hoping for, when you think of March Madness, when you're talking about intrigue, when you're talking about suspense, when you're talking about drama, you didn't really get that. Only a handful of games, and pretty much the last couple that I mentioned, where there was Florida, UConn, only because of the 2 teams that were involved. Obviously, it didn't come down to the wire, as we saw there with the Terrapins. But overall, I have to say the weekend was a C. And I may be even putting it nicely. You could say maybe a C minus. Now, you could say an F as far as drama, or maybe a D minus, because you did get yesterday, you did have a couple of intriguing scenarios there. But overall, when you think of March Madness, And I had people on social media getting at me. It's like, oh, what are you talking about? Drama? I mean, what are you expecting? It's basketball. This isn't a soap opera or a movie. I said, wait a minute. Why is this tournament deemed March Madness? Because of the buzzer beaters, because of the last second shots, because of the high intensity, because of the expectations of upsets, of just things that we would never expect, especially with the one and done, the way the tournament has become here over the last how many decades. So for people to say, oh, what are you talking about, JAYREELZ? Drama? It's just basketball. Why are you making it such a big deal? Well, why is it called March Madness? So you didn't get a lot of madness yesterday. You got a little bit, you didn't get a lot of madness over the 4 days, excuse me. You got a little bit yesterday. But overall, the tournament, despite the fact that we thought it was going to be chalk because of how top-heavy the tournament has been, or going into it, I should say. But you know what? At least the plus that you're going to get from this is that you're going to have, I would think, some fascinating basketball here starting Thursday night around 7:07 or 7:15. Because now you have a scenario where you don't have that Cinderella, that 13, 14, even 15 seeded team that's made it this far and therefore could get exposed and maybe blown out there in the first half of a game where you said, oh, the clock struck 12, but it certainly struck 12 a lot earlier, and hoping that we would get a game maybe into the second half, or dare I even say in the last 10 minutes of the game where that Cinderella team is hanging around or hanging on or maybe even has a shot to win the game. Now you're going to have a scenario where you're going to have all these teams, and even Arkansas for that matter, who knows, they could get exposed too. But because you have a lot of top-level teams that are left, a lot of one seeds, obviously all the ones are still there. You have 3 of the 2 seeds that are still around. And even though Iowa State, but you have a bunch of 3 seeds as well. And here is a situation where you're going to have some games where you could have a bunch of buzzer beaters. You're going to have a lot of intensity. And certainly, I would think a lot of drama heading into where a week from today, as we will unpack what will have taken place over the weekend, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of interesting takes, maybe some controversy, and who knows what. As the competition is stiffer, the games will be a lot more, I would think, compelling. And this coming weekend is going to be one to really look forward to, because you don't have the teams that are the Cinderellas. You don't have those that you kind of wonder about, wow, all right, they won those first 2 games. Can they remain hot? Can they remain on that magic carpet ride? As of right now, you don't really have a lot of that, because the only double-digit seeds that you have, other than Arkansas, as we talked about, when you think about it, that's it. You don't have any other double-digit seeds. Everything is going to be 1 through 4, as you'll see there in the Midwest, with Houston, Tennessee, Kentucky, and, of course, Purdue. And then when you look at the East, you have a scenario where BYU snuck in, but you have 1-seeded Duke, you have 2-seeded Alabama, and 4-seed Arizona. And then in the South, you have Auburn, number 1, as we know, followed by Michigan 5, who's played very well here in this tournament, and then Michigan State 2 with Ole Miss, rounding that out as a 6th seed. And then you have Florida, Maryland, the 1 and 4, and then Texas Tech, the 3, no St. John's, of course, and then Arkansas at 10. So to think, only 1 double-digit seed heading into the Sweet 16, and then you have a bunch of 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s with a couple of 6s sprinkled in. So you would think that the upcoming weekend is certainly going to blow away what we've seen here this past weekend, but obviously that remains to be seen, and you well know we will be on top of that, or I'll be on top of that. And real quick, I do have my bracket still intact, despite the fact St. John's as a 2, all right, fine. I thought that they would get to a regional final before losing to Florida, but if you recall, I had Florida coming out of the West. Florida still winning the whole thing. I had, as I got to scroll here, it's slowing up here. I have BYU as a 6 seed coming out. I have Tennessee. Now I know BYU, that's going to be a reach there, because for them to see how far they're going to get, and all I know is that I'm hoping that they'll be able to do so when it's all said and done. But for the other regions that I have, I picked, I'm all over the map here, people. My apologies. Florida, number 1. Let's start there. I also have Michigan State coming out in the South also Tennessee, and I have BYU. Now, BYU, are they going to be able to get past Duke? Obviously, they have Alabama to start, but we'll have to wait and see to think that the final 16 teams are there. All four that I have getting to a Final Four are still there. And I have Florida beating Duke in the championship game, as I talked about there on Thursday. So that's what we have with the college basketball, as we will take a pause there and we'll talk about the games more so on Thursday's podcast and more storylines, etc., as we get deeper into the week. Now I'll keep the high tops on and get to the NBA as I stick to the hardwood. And what we have here is a scenario where the players that are on the mend, that are looking to return, and big players at that. And on a side note, you have a player that's returning who's not injured to a place where he had resided, went to 2 NBA finals, and was traded there about a month and change ago in a one Jimmy Butler. He's making his return to Miami. So the theme here for the NBA is all about returns. And I'll start with LeBron James as he returned to the lineup. Remember, he suffered that groin injury in Boston there a couple of weeks ago and made his return as they got blown out by the Bulls, where Josh Giddey almost had a quadruple-double. He was a couple of steals away from a quadruple-double, which hasn't happened, I believe, since David Robinson did so for the Spurs many moons ago. But for the Lakers, as they have not played well, even without LeBron, and even though coming back in his first game, where you know he's going to be, I'm not going to say at half speed, but he's going to think about the big picture, and as we all know, that's going to be the postseason. And even though the Bulls, surprisingly, with that big win there in LA on Saturday, but for LeBron, it's just a matter of just tuning up, getting himself ready in the best shape possible, which we already know he is in, but getting that groin to the point where he doesn't really have to think about it. And for the Lakers, we all know the big picture is going to be how far they could go. 2 years ago, getting to a conference finals, we know, but they want to get beyond that. And what's going to be intriguing, obviously, with Luka there by his side. But for the Lakers in a Western Conference, which we'll go through the standings in a little bit, we know that they're going to try to do their best to at least get home court, maybe try to get a 2 seed so they can have 2 rounds in their building if they happen to get that far. Right now, they're currently 4th, but with teams that are right there in the mix, they could certainly get to the 2 seed within a couple of games. But for the Lakers, having LeBron back at this time, I think is important because, again, he could just kind of feel his way back into the lineup, feel how that groin is going to respond. Yes, he's probably not going to go all out defensively. And yes, offensively, when he has to turn it up, he'll do so. But you know he's going to proceed with caution here down the stretch of this season to make sure he goes into the postseason 100%, or at least as close to 100% as he possibly can. So we'll get to see how he's going to play over the course of these next few weeks. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another return, and this is actually twofold when it comes to Anthony Davis and Nikola Jokic. And I'll start with Anthony Davis because we know the Mavericks are in a rock fight to try to get to the postseason. And we know that they have been decimated by injuries. But considering that they have a 4-game road trip, which starts tonight in Brooklyn, right here, not stone's throw, but certainly over the bridge there on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge, where the Mavericks will face the Nets tonight, and then they'll go across the bridge into Manhattan to play the Knicks tomorrow night at the Garden. And it's quite possible that Anthony Davis could return tonight, maybe as early as tomorrow. So let's see how that adductor injury that he suffered in his first game against the Rockets back in early February, as he's missed already 6 weeks, how time flies, and how, just to think, how he's only played, 2.5 quarters, and now he could actually return, which I think is smart, provided that he is close to 100%, because if the Mavericks were thinking about punting the rest of the season away, and I get it, that even if they get into the postseason as a 10 seed, and they're going to get bounced by Sacramento, at least they are going down with a fight, because there were reports about Anthony Davis maybe putting him on ice for the rest of the year and having him brought back next year, considering no Kyrie and who knows when the likes of Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively and PJ Washington, and we know Kyrie is out until probably maybe even 2 years from now, even if he does make a return at the end of next year. But even the thought of putting Davis to the point where he's not going to return this year, to the ire and the chagrin of that fan base and what they've had to go through here over the last almost 2 months, you knew that the front office had to bring him back into the fold and at least give it a shot down the stretch to see if he can perform at a high level and see if they can get into the playoffs, because although no consolation if they do get in and get bounced in that first game against Sacramento, but at least they go down fighting and show that to their fan base that at least Davis is putting forth an effort and trying to get back in the lineup and hopefully stays healthy enough to where maybe even if they do or do not get into the postseason, but it does show that they at least they gave it a shot with the one guy that got shipped east, where, of course, the franchise face, Luka Doncic, was shipped out to La La Land. So let's see if Davis returns tonight or tomorrow. We'll keep in mind of that. And then you had Nikola Jokic, who sat out the last 4 games with an ankle injury. Now, they'll have a 5-game homestand forthcoming. And with Jokic, as we all know, battling it out for the MVP in the league, although I think it's SGA's award to win, or to lose, I should say, because I think he's the front runner despite Jokic's brilliance and his triple-double numbers this year at the center position. But for Jokic, I think it's going to be similar to LeBron. A lot of miles on those legs. A guy who, with an ankle injury like that, who knows if it's a high ankle sprain or just it's going to nag, but not fleet of foot. He is lumbering. So I'm sure they're going to also proceed with caution with him because they know the big picture is to have him healthy for 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 rounds of an NBA postseason. So we'll have to certainly pay attention to his progress, more so than Anthony Davis. Totally different set of circumstances, but even more so for Denver, as they have aspirations to try to get back to an NBA final, which they won 2 years ago, where just for Dallas, it's a matter of respectability for their organization, knowing that the player that they traded Luka Doncic away for and to bring Davis back, to have him at least give you an effort, is right now of the utmost importance there for a Maverick organization. And then you have the return of Jimmy Butler, where if you're the Miami Heat, I get it, they have a bit of a fan base down there, but let's face it, that team finally won a game beating Charlotte, snapping that 9-game losing streak they had. And for the Heat, who knows if they're going to sell out the building. I would think they're going to sell it out because of Steph Curry. And Curry, who hurt his tailbone there last week, is now in Miami meeting up with the team. His status for tomorrow night is uncertain at the moment. So who knows if he's going to suit up and play. The Warriors have been there since yesterday, so I'm sure whatever treatment he's going to get upon his arrival there, whether it was last night or maybe even as early as this morning, if whether or not he's going to go through shoot around and maybe take a shot at performing there tomorrow night in Miami. But I would think with all of the attention going to be zeroed in on Jimmy Butler and his return, and we know what he'd done there in a Heat uniform, the 2 finals runs that they had, although falling short against the Lakers in the bubble and Denver there 2 years ago. But I wonder if the fan base will come out and boo Jimmy Butler, because as we all know how that ended there in Miami with the comments that he made last year in the offseason while he was hurt, saying that, oh, if I was suited up, I would have beaten not only the Celtics, but also the Knicks, so on and so forth. And then Pat Riley, once that got through his ears, that's not going to sit well with him. And the front office and Jimmy Butler obviously didn't seem to coexist after that. And then Butler wanted his exit, missing team flights, and doing things that I like to try to get him off of the Heat team, which he obviously did, and is now in Golden State, and they played well since his arrival. But I wonder if and it's not a passionate fan base. I don't care what you say. I know to my guy Brian Murray's the only Miami Heat fan that I know, and I'm sure he could attest that the Heat fan down there, they're a bunch of front runners. But there is a little bit of a base now. If they're going to go and flock to the Kaseya Center, are they going to do so tomorrow night and just cascade boos down on Jimmy Butler? Who knows? I know I'm making this out bigger than what it is. It's not as if Jimmy Butler played there 15 years a la Dwayne Wade and is coming back. But this is what happens when you're getting toward the end of an NBA season. You got to grasp for straws at storylines, and this is one that we'll see how he performs. And even though he calls this Jimmy Butler is just another game, and he's going to certainly portray it that way, but I would think pregame, whether he does get the video montage at the break on the first period, in the first quarter, where they get a timeout, who knows that's going to happen. I'm sure it will, but we'll see. But anyway, that's what I have there with Butler and his return, so that's something just to keep an eye out for. And then the Celtics were sold. And when I talked about this, I don't know, a couple months ago, and thought to myself, I said, wait a minute, the Celtics are going to sell at this point, considering they're coming off a championship and have a chance to go back-to-back. And it made me think, how is this going to unfold here, whether it's going to happen mid-season or at the end of the season? And now it's happened. Mid-season, I'm sure it has to go through approval, but the early reports are that Bill Chisholm, who is a local guy from Boston, Celtic fan, who made his money in private equity, is a guy that purchased the franchise at $6.1 billion, which is just a fraction, a bit more of what the Washington Commanders sold for when Josh Harris, Magic Johnson and company bought the team, I guess, what was it, a couple of years ago or however long ago it was, there in the NFL. But for Chisholm, all I got to say to you, my guy, is this. Please do not go by the way of Matt Ishbia or Patrick Dumont of the Suns and Mavericks. Now, Wick Grosbeck, the principal owner, he's going to be there as a board of governors for the next couple of years. So although he's going to be around, I don't know if he's going to have the same type of scenario like Mark Cuban did, where he sold the majority and it was just kind of waiting in the wings, but certainly it doesn't really have any say, although he does have some stake in the ownership of the team. Now, for Grosbeck, I don't know if that's going to be a situation where he's going to be able to null deals or have some sort of input in on that. Who knows? But at the end of the day, it is Chisholm's team. But let's just hope that with the second apron that is going to come and they have big-time contracts, and we know that the luxury tax, when you add up all these contracts for these players, whether your name is Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Derek White. Now, Porzingis has one more year left, but I'm sure he's going to end up being dangled as trade bait. But also Drew Holiday, who got a big payday. And with a payroll that's going to be $500 million, you know they're going to pare that down big time. Let's just hope he doesn't make any boneheaded deals here or make any rash decisions, because he has the new owner syndrome as the shiny new toy that he could flex and he could just do whatever he wants and throws his weight around to make these silly deals. And next thing you know, they're going to end up being a laughingstock. Please, Bill Chisholm, as a Celtic fan that lives in New York City, please take heed to what I have to say. And I'm sure all the Celtic fans in the New England area are probably feeling the same way I do right now, despite the fact that they shouldn't have anything to worry about now. But this coming offseason and beyond, please don't go crazy. Don't do anything stupid. That's all I ask of you. And thank you for that. And then when we get to the stuff that's on the court, I know a big loss there for the Memphis Grizzlies. Brandon Clarke, who has a PCL sprain, out for the remainder of the season. He's a guy that provides size and defense, so you're not going to see him, which is going to be tough for Memphis here as they look forward to the postseason. And then the Cavaliers finally snapped that 4-game losing streak out west, winning in Utah last night in big-time fashion. So the Cavaliers, who had the Celtics inching closer there, but no sweat, as they have still a 5-game lead, and the Celtics are not going to catch them there for the 1 seed out west. But that's what you have there as far as NBA stuff that's happening, more so off the court and then some on. And then as far as the standings here, as we'll take a look before we look at the schedule. Now, in the East, as we've talked about here, 4, 5, and 6 is going to be the same storyline between Indiana, Milwaukee, and Detroit. They're all separated by 2 games, and to get that 4 seed is important in the first round for either one of those 3 teams. Now, Indiana would have home court over Milwaukee as of right now if the season ended today, but the Pistons, let's see if they could have a last-ditch effort to see if they could try to get the 4 seed. Now, as it is, 3-6 Knicks and Pistons, that would be a fascinating first round. Jalen Brunson's still going to be out of the lineup, and I would think, talk about a guy that's not really close to returning, but a guy that once he returns, another one that's going to have to get himself back into game shape and to fine-tune in his own right to get ready for what they would hope to be at least 2 rounds and maybe beyond of a postseason. So that 4, 5, 6 is going to be interesting. Forget about 7 through 10. I'm not going to get to Atlanta, Orlando, Chicago, Miami for the rest of this year. I'm sorry. When the play-in tournament begins, we'll talk about which teams are going to be there and what's going to happen. But to me, that is a flat-out disaster when we look at what's happening there at the bottom of the bracket. And then out west, we know about Oklahoma City. Now, Houston has played well here, and they have a 1-game lead over Denver, 2-game lead over the Lakers, 2.5 over the Grizzlies. Now, the Grizzlies have lost 3 in a row. Let's see if they can respond here and bounce back, because remember, Houston and Memphis were pretty much neck and neck for a while, going back as far as the All-Star break up until about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks ago. So we'll keep an eye on whether or not Memphis will either slide or maybe try to get themselves back to the middle or the upper part of that 2 through 5 range. Then you have Golden State, who are just 2 games behind Memphis, so you have to keep that in mind too, as Golden State, who, as I mentioned, will play Miami tomorrow. But they're in good stead, where Minnesota is just a half game behind the 6th seed, so that's a race that we got to look out for and that we certainly will keep in mind. As far as Phoenix and Dallas, we talked about that. Phoenix still has that 10th seed, although tied with the same record with the Mavericks. So you have some, I guess there may be some intrigue there for those who are just wondering whether or not Dallas is going to qualify, or whether Phoenix, as bad of a year as they have, they'll get some new life if they do get into the play-in scenario. But do I expect them to go far? Absolutely not. But that is your NBA as we get here toward the last 10, 11, 12 games of the season. And as far as the schedule goes over the next 3 days, tonight you have Minnesota and Indiana, Lakers in Orlando, Dallas at Brooklyn, and of course they play the Knicks tomorrow, as you know. Milwaukee at Phoenix. That's pretty much it. Tomorrow you have Warriors, Heat, as you know, Mavericks, Knicks, Atlanta at Houston, Cleveland still on the West Coast, Oklahoma City at Sacramento, and then Wednesday you got your ESPN doubleheader. TNT tomorrow is Golden State, Miami, and Oklahoma City, Sacramento. And then your TNT doubleheader is Lakers, Pacers, followed by Celtics, Suns. Then you have Milwaukee at Denver. Good game there. And that's pretty much it before we get to Thursday. And then Celtics City have episode 4 tonight, which I'm looking forward to, because now it's going to talk about the Bird years, pretty much from 80-81, and I would think up until about the 86 Celtic team, because I don't know if they're going to end it with the 86 Celtics or they're going to end it prior to the 86 team. I think they'll probably end it prior to the 86 team. I mean, that's one they're going to have to really go in depth and chronicle as one of the great teams of all time. And then who knows if it's going to end with bias and that tragedy there, as we all know. But tonight, looking forward to it. I'm sure it's going to take you through 81, 84, maybe even 85 for that matter, where the Celtics were certainly, and of course you're going to have Celtics Sixers, that 81 Eastern Conference Final, which was epic. Then they also met up in 82, where the Celtics down 3-1 in both of those series, in 81 and 82, I might add. In 82, they came all the way back, where they had home court in both of those series, but they did lose a Game 7. I'll never forget, I was with my cousin JD and my other cousin, his brother Josh, watching that on a Sunday afternoon. It was a cloudy day, I'll never forget, in the Northeast, where the Sixers just outlasted the Celtics there in that Game 7. So looking forward to seeing that as we close out the basketball. And now let me lace up the skates to go around with the National Hockey League. And there really isn't much to unpack here, sad to say. Now, the one thing I will say about the Ovechkin chase, and I know I've talked about this ad infinitum here over the last month or so, but with the Capitals, and they're playing well, they have the most points in the sport. I know that could be with a little bit of trepidation, as we all know, with the President's Trophy scenario. But here's where we're at with the Capitals. They have 12 games left, and even though he scored a goal a few nights ago and is now 7 away from passing Wayne Gretzky, where he's now at 888, and he wears the number 8, so how synergy would have it. But with 12 games to go and with 7 goals left, all right, you would think, okay, not bad. Pretty good. But I will say this. Time is running out on him, because he's going to need 1 for sure, but I would think at least 2 multiple goal games in order for him to get this record. Because to score just 1 goal, and it's not impossible, but to get 1 goal or at least 7 goals in 1 game over the course of the next 12 games is going to be rather hard. So to me, he's going to have to get 1 for sure, but at least 2 if he's going to break this record this year. And of course, that's the all-time goal-scoring record held by Wayne Gretzky, 894 goals. And Ovechkin now 6 from tying and 7 from surpassing. And with the Capitals, listen, they right now tops of the sport. I don't know if they're on a mission to get the President's Trophy. They have the 1 seed in the East in the bank, so that is no worry to them. They could actually take the pedal off the metal if they want, but Ovechkin is going to want to try to get this record, and I talked about this even as early as Thursday's podcast. Knowing that the games are clicking off the calendar, and if he's not going to get a goal in one game, or let's say he goes 2 or 3 games on a drought, that the line mates are going to try to pass him the puck left and right. Who knows if that's going to put a wrinkle into the Capitals just trying to close out the season strong, where they're just focusing on an individual record. Now, granted, it is a huge, ginormous individual record, as you know, but is this going to be a thing where we're going to force it, or they're going to try to rush it, or they're going to try to know that, there's 6 games left and he needs 7 goals, or they're going to just try to throw everything in the kitchen sink to try to get Ovechkin this record before the year closes out. Now, this is why he needs to get a multiple goal game here sooner than later. Now, if he gets a hat trick or something like that, that'd be fantastic. But I think if he gets just 1 or 2 2-goal games here, at least over the course of the next, we'll say 6 games. Because if he does that here in these first half dozen games, I think that will bode well for the last half dozen games. So let's say if he gets 4 goals in the next 6, now he just needs 3. Where if he does get a multiple goal game in that final 6-game stretch, then all he needs is an empty netter and he gets the record. So, which will be anticlimactic because you want him to get it in the middle of a game, hopefully a close game. You don't want it to be a blowout either way, where they're down 6-1, he scores that goal, or if they're up 6-1 and he scores the goal. But either way, it's still a goal they're going to celebrate, whether it's in that fashion or if it's an empty netter. But the clock and the calendar is moving by, and Ovechkin, who didn't get a goal over the weekend, let's see. We'll look at the schedule here in a moment just to find out what that's going to look like, not only over the course of the next couple of days, but even beyond into the weekend. But besides that, a couple of injury notes. Leon Draisaitl, that is one that you're going to have to wonder about. Now, he left the game with an undisclosed injury against Utah last week. That was last Tuesday. So who knows what that is? Who knows if it's a concussion? Who knows upper body, lower body? Leon Draisaitl, who leads the league in goal scoring this year, he has 49 goals, looking to get 50 for the 4th time in his career, and that is a huge loss. So I would think Edmonton just making sure, taking precautionary measures for him to get back. So that we'll have to wait and see. And then Seth Jarvis in Carolina out, I believe, with a concussion injury, and Carolina has played well here over the course of the last few weeks. So that could be an injury that we'll have to wait and see. Playoffs are still a few weeks away, but when you're looking at head injuries or an injury that could be significant, Carolina certainly doesn't want to lose a player like that, considering they don't have a big-time star. As I mentioned, even going back to last year, they have 4 good solid lines, very solid team, and plays within that system, and Jarvis being out could be a costly one. Then you have Pat Maroon, who's going to retire, and kudos to him, one of the last remaining ruffians or tough guys of the sport. Not that he's a throwback to the 80s or 90s, and that's not a knock on Pat Maroon. Again, he's just not that type of guy where you're going to look at among the likes of Dave Brown or Jay Miller or Bob Probert or John Cordick or guys like that. And again, I know people are going to say, there goes JAYREELZ on the fighter's soapbox, but it's true. Maroon, scrappy player, will get into it with anybody, as you know. Saturday in St. Louis, where he's from, announced his retirement at the end of the year. Member of the Blackhawks now, actually got into a fight on Saturday against Tyler Tucker there of St. Louis in a 4-1 loss. But for Maroon, kudos to him as he's looking to the next chapter of his life. Long career, won 3 Stanley Cups. In fact, one of a handful of people to win 3 Stanley Cups in a row. Did so with the 2019 Blues and then back-to-back cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning there in the early part of the 20s. So obviously, long career for him. Drafted, I believe, was 07? Maybe 09. I have to double-check that. But long career, kudos to him as Maroon will go off into retirement. And then what is this about a franchise in Houston for the NHL? Local billionaire Dan Friedkin, who is a chairman and CEO of the Gulf States Toyota, is looking to see if he can bring the National Hockey League to Houston. Now, they had a team many years ago in the AHL called the Houston Aeros. I don't know if they're still around. I'm not following the AHL like I once did. But who knows? Something to keep in mind there. Now, the NHL, they currently have 32 teams. Now, you're going to throw another one that have this off-kilter 33rd team. Maybe they want to bring in a 34th team just to kind of balance it out. As it is, it's uniform where you have 8 teams in each division, Metropolitan, Atlantic, Central, and Pacific. Why upset the apple cart by bringing in another team? Now, I'm sure the powers that be, Gary Bettman, of course, are going to have all their doors open, but there has to be, think about it. If they're going to make a move like this, there has to be some uniform here. You have to bring in another team just to make it even. You could put Houston in the West and then maybe have another team in the East. Or if they have another team that's going to play out West, who knows, Portland or a team up there where they could play with Seattle and have a rivalry with those two. And I'm just speculating here. I don't have any intel by any stretch. But Houston looks like they want to jump into the NHL forum to bring a team to the Lone Star State, another team I might add, to go along with the Dallas Stars. Maybe have a little bit of a rivalry there. Who knows? But that's what you have. Just to throw that out and let's see if there's going to be any traction for that moving along. Now as I take off the scale, oh wait, how can I even do that? Let me get to the schedule as well as the standings. I'm already getting ahead of myself, so my apologies there, people. Now, real quick, standings are pretty much the same when we look at it overall. Forget about the 1 seeds. We already know who they are, Winnipeg and Washington. Now, the division in the Atlantic is going to be contentious, as we know, separated by 4 points. Florida, 89, Toronto, 87, and Tampa with 85. And both Toronto and Tampa have a game in hand on Florida, so just keep that in mind. The Metropolitan, safe. Carolina has 10 points over the Devils in the division. Wild card, Ottawa, 79, Montreal, 75. Rangers, outside looking in, as Ottawa and Montreal are your first 2 seeds. Rangers at 74, Islanders at 73, Blue Jackets who've lost 6 in a row, and they're in a free fall. But at 71, so they're 4 points behind. And then the Red Wings at 75 points behind. You want to throw in Boston and Pittsburgh. And Boston, another team that's certainly in a major skid, losing 6 in a row, are 6 points behind. So I guess you got to throw them in the mix, considering that they're a 3-game winning streak and a 3-game losing streak by Montreal by trying to sneak in through the back door for the wild card. And then out west, you have Dallas, 3 points ahead of Colorado for the 2nd seed in the Central Division. And then you have Minnesota, 4 points behind Colorado to see if they could overtake the Avalanche there to be a part of the first round against Dallas, if that would be the case. Then you have the Kings and Oilers tied at 87 points, 5 behind the Vegas Golden Knights there in the division. And LA, great job by them. They've won 3 in a row and now have the 2 seed overall as of right this moment, and a game in hand on both Edmonton and Vegas, game in hand on both of those teams, the Kings that is. Then you have the Wild and Blues, 85 and 81, followed by Calgary, 77 points is the wild card. 76 for Vancouver, and 75 for Utah. So as we talked about before, 4 teams for 1 spot there in the West for the wild card there, and I talked about that on Thursday. And then if you want to throw in Boston and Pittsburgh, you count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have 8 teams for 1 spot, again. 8 teams for 1 spot, but we would think as of right now, it's going to be Canadiens, Rangers, Islanders, Blue Jackets, for that 1 spot. Maybe Red Wings. So that's what you have there. And then your schedule this week. Tonight, you have Vancouver, New Jersey. Vancouver, they lost to the Rangers there on Saturday. They're the latest team making the tri-state circuit. Jersey tonight, and then the Island on Wednesday to play the Islanders. Blue Jackets, Islanders tonight. Minnesota at Dallas. And then Detroit at Utah. Tomorrow, Pittsburgh at Tampa. Montreal at St. Louis. Vegas at Minnesota. Washington at Winnipeg. Detroit, Colorado, for old time's sake. Remember that old rivalry in the 90s? Far cry from it, I might add. Then you have the Rangers going out to LA to play the Kings as they're doing a last-ditch West Coast trip here late in the season. And then Wednesday, Vancouver and the Islanders. Dallas at Edmonton. And Boston, Anaheim, Jersey, Chicago. That's what you have there. And then you have Washington and Minnesota there on Thursday. And then the Caps, then into the weekend, They don't play Saturday. Wow, so they have one other game, and I'm sure they got to play Sunday. Maybe that's an ABC game. Sunday, the Capitals. Let me make sure. Saturday. Sunday, they host Buffalo. So that is your Ovechkin watch here for the week as to whom the Capitals play there in the National Hockey League. All right, now, I can get in the batter's box now to talk some baseball, and we'll get to opening day, Thursday. Programming note. You've heard it here right now, and I talked about this a little bit on Thursday. Your Major League Baseball preview for 2025 is going to take place on a live stream. It won't be on the podcast Thursday. So you've heard it here now. High noon, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, it's going to be on my YouTube channel, but I'm actually thinking about putting it out on all my social media platforms. That means Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I think I can do it on Twitter as well. I don't know about Twitter just yet, but I think I can live stream on all those platforms. Go to my YouTube channel. Later on, I will confirm that. But I'm really thinking about spreading it out on all platforms just for everybody to jump on board. Whether you see me on Facebook or whether you see me on Instagram, you will definitely know that the Major League Baseball preview will be in full effect. And it has a complete breakdown. Divisions, surprises, over-under totals you'll get for the year, my World Series prediction, the whole enchilada, a Met preview. You know I got to delve in on my New York Mets this year. And then whatever else is happening in the sports world, I'll talk about it afterwards and maybe even add a little wrinkle there, as I like to do at the end, more of a personal touch to the live stream. YouTube at JAYREELZ, so definitely keep an eye out for that, as baseball is now 72 hours away. And with that being said, what is baseball thinking here with these start times for opening day? Now, bad enough, you're not getting a full slate of Major League Baseball games, which is criminal when you ask me. Because when you think about baseball, you think of a full schedule. You think of from 1 o'clock all the way up till, I guess, 10 o'clock, if games are going to start on the West Coast at that time. But here's the thing that bothers me if you're a baseball fan. You don't have any 1 o'clock games. So let me just count here. 1, 2, 3. You have 14 teams, or 14 games, and you know there's 30 teams, so there's going to be 2 teams that are not going to play on opening day. And based on the look of it, I can see right off the bat, is Colorado at Tampa. Now, I understand their scenario is different because they're playing their games at Steinbrenner Field and not at the Trop, as you all know, because of the dome being ripped apart due to one of the hurricanes last fall. So you have not a full slate of games, which that's bad. And all right, granted that one game is not going to be played. Okay, I can live with that. But why is it that these start times, Milwaukee playing the Yankees in the Bronx, not at 1:05, it's at 3 o'clock. The Cincinnati Reds, who always open up the baseball season in their building, playing the San Francisco Giants. What time is that game? That game is at 4:10. Mets in Houston, 4:10. Baltimore, Toronto, 3:07. What happened to the 1 o'clock start time on opening day? You want to play those games earlier so at least it's relatively warm in the climates that are still going through a bit of a chill here, whether it's in the Northeast or the Midwest for that matter. Baltimore is playing in Toronto. Of course, they have a dome, so you don't have to worry about that. Yankee Stadium, the temperature, I believe right now, the high is going to be 48 degrees. So could you imagine you have a 3 o'clock game, which could be 48, but if the game is at 5:30, 6 o'clock and you still have fans in the building, it could be probably in the low 40s, maybe with a wind chill in the 30s. What are we doing here, Major League Baseball? And then you have a bunch of 4 o'clock or 4:10 games. Then you have a 7 o'clock game where the Tigers will play the Dodgers as they'll raise the banner and get their rings there at 7 o'clock. And then you have 2 10 o'clock games, Chicago, Arizona, and the Athletics playing in Seattle. Why? Why can't they all be afternoon games? It's opening day. Baseball, I don't know. This is, to me, as a lifelong baseball fan, first love. All right, you want to start games at 4 o'clock? Fine. But can we have a 1 o'clock and a 4 o'clock window? And the Dodgers, I get it, 7 o'clock, but it's 4 o'clock on the West Coast. Okay, I can deal with that. Not a problem. But 2 night games? And all these games in the middle of the day? What is this, the last day of the season? Game 162 where everybody plays at 3 o'clock? Now we're doing that for opening day? I have a major problem with that. I'm sorry. And then you have some issues here with some injuries, which if you're the Yankees, your starting rotation this year is looking like this. Opening day, Carlos Rodon, okay, fine. Followed by Max Fried, Marcus Stroman, Carlos Carrasco, and Will Warren. Because you don't have Garrett Cole, as we all know, out with Tommy John surgery. You don't have Luis Hill with a lat strain out for 2 months at least. And now you're not going to have Clarke Schmidt, who has a shoulder strain, and who knows when his return is going to be. So because of Schmidt out, you bring in Carlos Carrasco as your fifth starter, and you really have a mass unit when it comes to your rotation. How you hope they could just at least keep it together until Hill comes back. And I'm not trying to make Hill out to be El Duque, but considering Rodon, what are you going to get from him? Or Rodon, what are you going to get from him? I don't know. He's hit or miss, up and down, hot or cold, even though his last spring start was pretty good. And Max Fried, big-time expectations, 8-year, $218 million deal, so he's going to have to deliver big time. So this Yankee team, over the course of these first 2 months, they're going to either have to outslug everybody, and we all know that their offense right now is a question mark because who knows what you're going to get from Cody Bellinger? Who knows what you get from Paul Goldschmidt? We know Giancarlo's on the shelf there with the elbow inflammation. Aaron Judge, what are you going to do for an encore after a season last year? Another MVP under his belt with 58 home runs, but no Juan Soto. And Austin Wells, how much is he going to contribute into that lineup? No Gleyber Torres, we know he's out. And what is going to happen here with this team? Jason Dominguez, is he going to be the guy that's going to carry the load? So a lot of question marks with this Yankee team as you enter opening day there on Wednesday against the Brewers. And then you also have Gunnar Henderson. You talk about a guy and a team that desperately needs one another. The Orioles, as we talked about, have not made a lot of moves this offseason. And Charlie Morton being the biggest one of all, 41 years of age, to be a third starter at best. But for Henderson, who has an intercostal injury, which is an injury between the rib cage and the thoracic core, which is similar to the injuries that Matt Harvey once upon a time, and I believe Steven Strasburg also had that thoracic outlet injury, or injury, I believe that's what it's called. So who knows how long he's going to be on the shelf, and that is a huge loss considering that he's one of the core guys of that team to go along with, as we all know, Adley Rutschman, and I would think Jackson Holliday is going to make the team coming out of spring training. So huge loss there for the Orioles. Shane McClanahan to keep it in the AL East, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery, which he suffered in August of 2023. Well, he's not going to start off the season with the big club as he's on the IL with a triceps injury. So the Rays, who are going to need anything and everything to try to get themselves close to what they once were going back 3-4 years ago as a team that had made the playoffs, even won a division. But now they're going to miss him, at least for the start of this season, so we'll have to keep that in mind. And then let's see with Toronto, nope, no injuries to report, but the front office is optimistic to re-sign Vladimir Guerrero. And with Vladdy, he even said that he's probably looking for a $500 million deal. I don't know if the Blue Jays are going to do that, despite the fact that in past off seasons, they looked at Shohei Ohtani, they looked at big contracts with big players, and fell short. So if Vladdy's going to have a monster year, obviously that price tag is going to go up. If he's going to have a pedestrian year for him, where that means maybe power numbers are down and the average may not be at 320, 330, but 290, 300. Who knows? So something to keep in mind there when it comes to the Blue Jay slugger, as he is looking for big bucks and could be headed out of town at the end of this year. So that's what you have with the baseball. NFL, am I really going to talk about Jameis Winston signing a 2-year deal for $8 million with the Giants? Stopgap guy. Who knows what's going to happen with the draft here at the end of next month. So that's something to keep in mind for the Giants. I said I'm not talking about Aaron Rodgers as long as he signed somewhere, and then we'll discuss as he visited the Steelers the other day, and I'm putting on my Helden and shoulder pads for about another 5 seconds. But that's all I got with the NFL, and that's all I even want to talk about. But in closing, some sad news as I lace up the boxing gloves and get in the ring. Friday night, a one George Foreman, who, as we all know, probably more popular in his post-boxing career than he was during his career. And that was a career that spanned decades. Beating Joe Frazier in 73 the way he did. The Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire against Muhammad Ali, where Muhammad Ali did a number on him. And yes, fought in and out, actually took a hiatus from boxing for a time, and then came back there in the latter part of the 80s, early 90s. And then all he did in 94 was knock out Michael Moorer. Now, I know Michael Moorer, not to be confused with the heavyweights of the heyday in boxing, whether it is Ali, Frazier, Foreman, Larry Holmes, Ernie Shavers, etc. But he did recapture the title in 94 in what was an improbable knockout, where watching the fight, Moore was winning the fight on all cards, even mine, yours truly, for what that counts. And then the 11th round, I believe it was, a right hand to the jaw of Moore, and he went down like a house of cards. Heavyweight champion, 46 years of age, the oldest champion in the history of the sport. And therefore, in the post-career with the Foreman grills, and I actually owned one back in the 90s into the 2000s, how popular were those where, listen, do I have to even get into the Foreman grill and save the grease and didn't have to worry about having to cook your burger or chicken or whatever it was in a pan and it's going to just sit in grease and oil, etc. As revolutionary as that was, and having his name on that, which became a boon for his career and for his popularity if he wasn't already popular. But George Foreman, 76 years of age. I don't even know what, it was undisclosed, I believe, his death, but obviously one of the great personalities, not only of the sport, but also in his post-career. Dies at the age of 76. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Foreman family, to the boxing community, and if you want to say to the George Foreman grill community as well. 76 years of age, way too young, and to think with Ali, Frazier, Larry Holmes is still around, but the heavyweights of that era and those times there in the 70s now starting to slip away from us. So as he transitions, rest in peace there, George, on a wonderful and illustrious career. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for passing by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful toy department, as I like to call sports. And if you haven't done so, people, please, I implore you to subscribe, rate, throw me a few stars, write a review on whichever podcast platform you listen to, Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com is the website. Of course, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, which I'll have the visual for those who want to watch the podcast instead, and also on Spotify. You can watch the visual there too, people. So it's both dual threat there on Spotify. Please subscribe, rate, all that to increase the visibility of this podcast with all the others that are out there. As you know, I'm an independent podcaster, content creator, trying to blaze a path and trail in this business, trying to earn a living, which I'm slowly but surely getting to, but not doing enough here. So again, take screenshots, put it on your social media, share it with your family, friends, foes, frenemies, to the good, the great, the casual, the diehard, the kook sports fan in your life. Please, people, I would really sincerely appreciate that. So if you could go ahead and do that, I would, one more time, thank you for doing so. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following. On Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. This is why I quit my job almost 14 months ago to pursue this full-time, to once again blaze a trail, to put myself in this podcast universe with all the others that are out there. But I'm not worried about the competitors. I'm worrying about yours truly, to be that household name. Because every time I sit in front of this camera and microphone, I will deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.